So Sally Yates, the political hack and former acting attorney general until President Trump fired her for not doing her job, um, sort of became a bit of a hero to people on the left because of that. Uh, she was seen as somewhat of a martyr because she was, taken out by Trump because she opposed his executive order um, banning travel from seven countries, seven terror-riddled countries that we are bringing refugees from that cannot be properly vetted. She didn't like that executive order. She decided to not use her role as the acting attorney general to actually defend that executive order in court. So, as the head of the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, it is her job to basically control all of the lawyers for the Department of Justice. She said that they were not going to defend that executive order because she didn't like it, basically, is what that boiled down to. An example of political activism where it is inappropriate, absolutely inappropriate. If she wants to make laws, she can go ahead and become a congressman or a congresswoman, rather. Sorry, I don't mean to be politically incorrect there. But she didn't do that. Instead, she got fired, which was awesome, celebrated by people on the right. Seen as Nixonian by people on the left. And so she sort of became like a bit of this icon and is loved by people on the left now. She's a hero. And she is now part of the investigation into the Trump-Russia connection, the investigation that the FBI and other departments are conducting. And she is making some pretty wild accusations. And she testified on Monday to the Senate alongside the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who is the guy who famously lied that the NSA was actually getting information from American citizens. It was all revealed by Edward Snowden that the NSA actually was, and he lied about it under oath. It was perjury, but he didn't really get in a whole lot of trouble for that. So that is James Clapper for you. Not exactly the most trustworthy fella out there, but still someone that, hilariously enough, gets sort of propped up as a credible source of information. It's pretty astounding, really. But the testimony that the two of them had, especially Sally Yates, was pretty incredible for a couple of reasons, and I'd like to go over that. So this is from Fox News. Yates says Flynn could have been blackmailed. Clapper knocks collusion narrative. President Trump ousted National Security Advisor Michael Flynn took more hits at a Senate hearing Monday where former top justice official Sally Yates testified she warned the Trump White House that Flynn could, quote, essentially be blackmailed by Moscow for having misled the VP about his Russia contacts. At the same hearing, testimony from another Obama official also challenged persistent allegations from some of the Trump administration's fiercest critics about, quote, collusion with Russia during the 2016 campaign. James Clapper, who served as Director of National Intelligence during the Obama administration, stood by past assertions that he had no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Asked by Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, whether the assessment is still accurate, Clapper said, quote, it is. So that's important. So that's the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, saying that there is, to his knowledge, no information that would be regarded as collusion between anyone in the Trump campaign and the Russian government. That's important because of the position that he's in. He would definitely have access to that sort of material if it was there, if it was available. And the other people that share his sentiment are pretty numerous. They're basically anyone who's actually seen or had access to this information. While they may throw allegations out there, when really pressed, even people like Dianne Feinstein have to admit at the end of the day that there is no evidence of collusion. And there you had, of course, James Clapper, the former DNI, saying that. But Sally Yates almost contradicted what Clapper said. She basically comes out and she says that she can't say whether or not there is any evidence of collusion because that's classified. So, it's just this sort of argument where it's like, you have to take my word for it, and I don't think that's going to fly with a lot of people. And the story goes on. The focus of the Graham-led hearing, however, was Yates' account on Flynn. Her first public testimony on the episode. Yates served in the Obama Justice Department and briefly as acting Attorney General for Trump until the president fired her for refusing to defend his initial travel ban. Clapper admitted he was also not initially aware of the FBI's counterintelligence probe into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election, but he said if there was any evidence of collusion, it, quote, didn't reach the evidentiary bar needed for an intelligence assessment issued earlier this year. Clapper further reiterated that his team could not corroborate the contents of an infamous anti-Trump dossier that was shared with officials earlier this year. So the dossier that's referring to was this unsubstantiated report that was put together by a former British spy that was paid to do opposition research on President Trump. It hasn't been corroborated by anybody, let alone anybody with any sort of credibility. It's almost certainly 100% false, the contents of the dossier. And it was actually put forward by organizations like BuzzFeed and CNN, especially BuzzFeed, as possibly being true, and it is definitely a classic example of fake news. And then, of course, so that's Clapper. Clapper says there's no evidence of collusion. There's, the anti-Trump dossier. None of it, can be corroborated. There's really nothing there. And then you have Sally Yates. Yates told the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism that she first notified the White House counsel Don McGahn in late January about Flynn's contacts with the Russian ambassador at a time when he apparently was relaying information to the contrary to Vice President Pence. So after Mike Flynn was having conversations with the Russian ambassador, it sort of became this firestorm. And apparently he misled the vice president when he was recalling the contents of the conversations that he had, or the conversation that he had with the Russian ambassador. And apparently that is what led to his firing. Now, the media, of course, came up with several different conspiracy theories, basically, that Mike Flynn was fired because of his Russian collusion, of course, of which there is zero evidence for, zero. And poor Mike Flynn has just not been able to get out of the spotlight since then. He has had tremendous pressure put on him to, basically comply with the commission, with the hearings that are going on right now, and to testify and to provide them with all this additional information. And basically what he is the victim of is almost certainly a witch hunt. There's really no evidence he's done anything wrong, yet he's being treated like a criminal. And it doesn't seem, unfortunately for Mike Flynn, that the controversy surrounding him is going to be slowing down anytime soon. She said they met in a secure facility, and she informed McGaughan about Flynn's contacts in a, quote, fair amount of detail. And this was this is Sally Yates speaking with the White House counsel Don McGaughan. She said that conduct was problematic in part because the Russians knew about those contacts and knew he had misled Pence about them. So she's trying to imply that because Mike Flynn misled the Vice President, Mike Pence, that somehow the Russians could use that as blackmail. That almost seems like what she's implying, which would be quite different than implying that the Russians were actually colluding with him and had some other form of blackmail. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they would use him misleading the Vice President to blackmail him. Presumably, if he was colluding with the Russians, they would have already had some kind of a deal put in place. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they would use that situation to blackmail him. So what it seems like she's basically trying to do here is be able to say something controversial like Mike Flynn could potentially be blackmailed, when she can get away with saying that because she's not actually implying that there is evidence of collusion of sorts. So it's a way of sort of throwing out this accusation, but then also being able to sort of step back, when it really comes down to, having to be taken accountable for, the accusations that you put out there. So Sally Yates is basically one of the main people that's being propped up as the sort of, symbol of the sort of, probe into the Russian collusion. She is sort of seen as one of the people who, has been heavily involved in it and, has information that maybe other people don't have. So of course she tries to, she throws out the notion that she can't say one way or the other whether there was actually collusion because that's actually classified. So she gets to sort of hide behind that, and she gets to throw out accusations like Mike Flynn could be blackmailed, when the example or the reason she gives for that doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, not from my point of view at least. And the article goes on here. That created a compromise situation, Yates testified, where the National Security Advisor could essentially be blackmailed by the Russians, again, supposedly for misleading Mike Pence about the contents of the conversation that they had, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, again, but I think this is just Sally Yates trying to toe the line for the Russian collusion narrative. She later testified, quote, "We knew that was not a good situation, which is why we wanted to let the White House know about it." And of course, the fact that you had basically this spying of American citizens, including, of course, Mike Flynn, and this wide dissemination of information throughout intelligence agencies, and then, of course, the leaking illegally of classified information from the intelligence community to the media. That, again, still is the actual scandal, the real scandal, and the real story that the media doesn't really want to pay any attention to. So all day long we hear from Sally Yates, we hear from James Clapper, we hear from Chuck Schumer all day long. We hear from just all these people, all these Democrats, all these political hacks, all these former Obama people. But you really don't get to hear too much from the people that are being accused. You get to hear the accusers and the accusations. You don't really get to hear much from the people being accused. Well, one of the people that has been accused of being one of the supposed masterminds behind the Trump-Russia collusion narrative is Roger Stone. Roger Stone is a longtime friend and confidant, associate, if you will, of President Trump. How actively he is involved in President Trump's current affairs is certainly up to debate. Some people say that he is a regularly frequent, almost informal advisor to the president. Some people, including the president, say that he basically hasn't spoken with Roger in quite some time. But the bottom line is the media and the Democrat establishment and others, even some Republicans. I am, definitely looking at you, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain, that all say that he is basically the devil incarnate and that he colluded with Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, and colluded with the Russians as well to sort of release the DNC leaks and the Podesta emails. And that's the accusation that's thrown out there. Now, Roger Stone himself hasn't been able to defend himself. He hasn't been able to actually go in front of Congress, go in front of the Senate or the House, and actually be able to defend himself in any way whatsoever. He's actually been banned from many different media outlets. And what you have here is the classic case of sort of the straw man argument. You've got the idea, the perception of Roger Stone as being sort of this Russian agent, this evil guy, and then you've got the reality of the matter. And this article from InfoWars sums it up pretty nicely. Roger Stone dares Dems to let him testify under oath in public. Libertarian firebrand and longtime Trump confidant Roger Stone looks forward to an opportunity to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee about his alleged involvement with Russia to rig the 2016 election for Donald Trump. So, Roger Stone has said time and time and time again he would be more than happy to go in front of Congress. He would be, more than happy to give his side of the story. But again, they don't want it. They don't want his side of the story. They want to continue to float out this narrative that there was possible collusion between the Russians. They want there to be this sort of cloud of mystery surrounding Trump and surrounding his associates so that they can undermine his presidency for as long as they possibly can, because they don't want to admit the fact that it wasn't the Russians at all that had anything to do with Hillary Clinton's historic loss in the Electoral College to Donald Trump, a reality television star. And of course, they are still quite butthurt about that. And the article goes on here. But after a letter dated April 28th from the Senate Intelligence Committee, jointly signed by the chairman, Republican Senator Richard Burr, and by the vice chairman, Democratic Senator Mike Warner, asking Stone to make himself available for a quote, closed interview with designated committee staff at a mutually agreeable time. Stone is not so sure the U.S. Congress wants the American people to hear his side of the story. Senator Dianne Feinstein, the most despicable Democratic senator since, well, I don't know. There's a lot of despicable Democratic senators. I guess I got to concede on that one. Senator Dianne Feinstein demonstrates the Democratic Party ambivalence over what to do with Stone now that he has been made out by Democrats to be the arch villain who orchestrated the Julian Assange WikiLeaks hack and published release of the embarrassing emails Democrats wrote to and from Hillary's 2016 campaign chair, John Podesta. And I mean, there was some pretty, crazy stuff in those emails. I mean, the things that some of Hillary Clinton's staffers actually thought about her was pretty funny. A lot of the people thought that she was quite incompetent in many ways, that she was a very violent and angry person. And it is definitely just kind of funny to see some of the infighting that goes on in the Democratic Party, because especially when you're talking about Hillary Clinton's campaign, that is a group of scoundrels right there, and there is no honor among thieves. So, and I mean, just the things that Hillary Clinton herself, said in some of her emails. I mean, she called the Bernie Sanders supporters basement dwellers, people that live in their mother's basement, and baristas. Of course, she also called half of Trump supporters deplorables. So, in one fell swoop, she managed to alienate about half the country there. That was a very wise political move on her part, for sure. And it goes on here. At the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing grilling FBI director on May 3rd, Feinstein ripped Comey for not investigating Stone's alleged connection to Russia, right after she ripped Comey for having investigated Hillary Clinton's email scandal. Quote, "I join those who believe the actions taken by the FBI did in fact have an impact on the election," Feinstein said in her prepared opening statement. What's worse is that, while all of this was going on in the public spotlight, while the FBI was discussing an investigation into Senator Clinton's email server in detail, I cannot help but notice that the FBI was noticeably silent about the investigation into the Trump campaign and interference into the election, she continued. Feinstein commented that Stone posted a tweet declaring, quote, "Trust me, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel," as well as noting Stone, quote, bragged he was in communications with WikiLeaks, and there was, quote, "no telling what the October surprise might be." So, I mean, there you go. You got Senator Dianne Feinstein, Franken-Feinstein, coming out and just throwing out these accusations, saying that because of a tweet that he posted, that's somehow, evidence of collusion, which is completely absurd, and I'll explain why. In making these comments, Feinstein ignored Stone's defense that his comment about Podesta's time in the barrel referenced research he was preparing to publish, documenting Russia's payments to Podesta in the form of stock granted through a shell company in the Netherlands that Russia created to facilitate money laundering operations. So the tweet that he put out there wasn't even about what she thought it was about. It was about something completely different, but that doesn't really matter to somebody like Dianne Feinstein, because it's not about the truth, it's about pushing a narrative. Nor did Feinstein consider Stone's argument of the timing of his various comments about WikiLeaks and the October surprise were weeks after Guccifer 2.0 and WikiLeaks separately published the Podesta emails in question. So she's looking at tweets that Roger Stone did after all this stuff was already released, after it had already happened, and she points at that and says that that is somehow evidence of collusion. Absolutely absurd, absolutely bizarre. And I would expect nothing less from the Democrats. And it is worth mentioning that Guccifer 2.0, who they claim, this hacker, who they quote-unquote hacker, who they claim is a Russian agent with no proof, again, no proof, but hey, who needs proof? Everyone's just a Russian agent nowadays. He was not exactly, the top-level hacker out there. This guy was pretty much just a sort of low-level computer geek, basically, and reportedly, and now I'm not sure this is 100% accurate, but reportedly, what he did is he guessed John Podesta's password. And apparently, what John Podesta's password is, get this, password. Yes, his password was actually password. So, not exactly the highest level of security there when you're talking about an official government email. And the DNC, which was supposedly hacked, of course, many people think that Seth Rich, the DNC staffer, who was a Bernie Sanders supporter, who was upset about the fact that the DNC was openly collaborating to push for Hillary Clinton and against Bernie Sanders. This staffer, Seth Rich, was upset about that, and many people think that he was actually the source of the DNC leaks, the DNC emails, because of course, after or around the time these emails came out, he was of course shot dead in D.C., Washington, D.C., and it was reported that it was a robbery, even though nothing was taken from him, including an expensive watch and his wallet. So, I'll let you judge for yourself on that. But even if they were hacked, the DNC had almost no cybersecurity measures in place to be able to stop a hack. Now, the RNC, the Republican National Committee, was also apparently hacked, presumably by the same people that supposedly hacked the DNC. The RNC, however, did have the proper cybersecurity measures in place, and the hackers weren't able to get through. The DNC did not have those measures in place. The hackers were able to get through. John Podesta's password was password. So the moral of the story here is anybody could have gotten in there. Anybody could have gotten that stuff. It could have been, Joe Blow on the couch. It could have been the Chinese. It could have been the Russians. It could have been, some 12-year-old in his mother's basement. Nobody really knows. And when you look at all this, it paints a pretty clear picture that what you've got going on here is a false narrative being pushed by the Democrats to try to undermine the Trump presidency. And one wonders if it will ever slow down. When will the madness stop? Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be anytime in the near future. And now we move on to Wired.com, and it looks like those pesky Russians are at it again. The NSA confirms it. Russia hacked the French election infrastructure, so the Ruskies are even trying to influence the French election. I'm guessing they failed, because I don't think Macron would have been their pick. And of course, Marine Le Pen lost the French election in a landslide, which was proved to be a quite massive defeat for populism. There are different ideas put forward as to why Marine Le Pen lost. The polls coming up to election were showing them basically neck and neck, pretty much a lot closer than what the landslide defeat wound up being. A lot of people are pointing at different cases of possible voter fraud. One case being something like 500,000 duplicate ballots that were sent to likely pro-Macron voters. And then the French police came out and said, oh, well, that's kind of weird, but we're not going to investigate that. Maybe we'll investigate it after the election. I mean, they literally said that. 500,000 double ballots get sent out. And there was other evidence of voter fraud, but when you're talking about a landslide loss like that, it's really hard to rig something like that. I think the people of France were just not quite ready for somebody like Marine Le Pen. I think she was off-putting to a lot of people. Her father, unfortunately, his sort of reputation kind of gets put onto Marine Le Pen, and he is a more of a sort of fringe, kind of an extreme character who definitely puts out a lot of, arguably racist rhetoric and other things. And unfortunately, Marine Le Pen sort of gets colored with that same brush. And I think there were a lot of things that were just sort of a turnoff to the French people. Unfortunately, the French people, at least in recent history, also have sort of a bad history of capitulation. And it seems like that may have played a factor in this as well. But the article goes on. 2 days before France's recent presidential election, hackers leaked 9 gigabytes of emails from candidate Emmanuel Macron's campaign onto the web. Since then, the Kremlin has once again emerged as the likeliest culprit. Oh, would you look at that? Those darn Ruskies, they're just worldwide, aren't they? But while public evidence can't definitively prove Russia's involvement, of course it can't, NSA Director Michael Rogers suggested to Congress today that America's most powerful cybersecurity agency has pinned at least some electoral interference on Moscow, just like in the United States election. Would you look at that? Isn't that just special? In a hearing of the Senate's Armed Forces Committee, Rogers indicated that the NSA had warned French cybersecurity officials ahead of the country's presidential runoff that Russian hackers had compromised some elements of the election. For skeptics, that statement may help tip the balance towards credibility, blaming Russia for the attacks. Quote, if you look at the French election, we become aware of Russian activity. We had become aware of Russian activity, Rogers said in a response to questions from Senator Kristen Gillibrand about the allegations of Russian hacking into the Macron campaign. Quote, we had talked to our French counterparts prior to the public announcements of the events publicly attributed this past weekend and gave them a heads up. Quote, look, we're watching the Russians. We're seeing them penetrate some of your infrastructure. So the Russians are coming. They are just taken over the world, apparently, or at least trying to, if the almighty Russians were able to sway the United States presidential election and install a puppet regime in President Donald Trump's administration, then it's a little bit of a mystery as to why they would have a massive landslide defeat in France. But who knows? I guess that is just a mystery that just may never be solved. It's like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? The world may never know. How much Russian influence has corrupted the entire world. I mean, we're just all Russian agents at this point. Just get used to it. And now we move on to Sky News, and we move from the fake threat of Russian interference and Russian takeovers and Russian chicanery to kind of another fake threat, but more of a real threat in some ways. And that would be North Korea. So this is from Sky News. North Korea not afraid as it plans new nuclear test, says ambassador in UK. North Korea's ambassador to the UK told Sky News his country will go ahead with its 6th nuclear test at the time and place of its leader's choosing. In its first interview in the role, Ambassador Cho II, probably butchered that, said his country would continue its ballistic missile and nuclear programs in spite of international warnings against them, and violating international law, and, no big deal there, and dismissed UN sanctions as having no legal grounds. And they're talking about, that's just a little bit ironic there, North Korea talking about the legality of things, and had no effect. In regards to the 6th nuclear test, I do not know what the scheduled time for it is, as I am here in the UK, not in my home country, Mr. Cho said. Quote, however, I can say the nuclear test will be conducted at the place and time as decided by our supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. Their supreme demonic chipmunk, Kim Jong-un. So, I mean, the North Korean situation has been escalating for years now, long before President Trump. But it's sort of coming to a head right now because you're moving from an administration that sort of capitulated, sort of looked the other way as North Korea continued to be belligerent and aggressive, and now you're moving into an administration that is taking a completely different stance. As they say, the strategic patience, basically, that was implemented in the last administration is over. President Trump has said time and time again that his political idea in terms of foreign policy with a nation, especially like North Korea, is the old Reagan phrase, peace through strength. So, America is the big stick militarily in the world. President Trump knows that. He knows that full well. And he is completely willing, 100%, to use the full leverage politically and militarily that the United States has. And it's a double-edged sword. It's playing with fire. It's dangerous. We live in a dangerous geopolitical environment in a dangerous world, but sometimes you have to take risks. Sometimes you have to use a show of force. Sometimes you have to show that you are willing to actually take a stand, because if you don't, what you have is little demonic chipmunks like Kim Jong-un running around every day saying that they're going to nuke people, which is a complete and total joke because they basically can't even get a missile off the launch pad. Well, let me tell you what, little fat boy, we definitely can, so you should probably quit pushing it. And now we move on to Fox News and a little bit of Obamacare news, because everybody loves Obamacare. Obamacare cost spike is Trump's fault. And if in case you didn't hear, it's all Donald Trump's fault. ACA architect Gruber says. And Gruber, old Jonathan Gruber, the MIT professor who famously went around college campus after college campus saying that it was due to the stupidity of the American voter that Obamacare was able to pass in the first place, is now coming out and blaming Donald Trump for the failure of Obamacare. You can't make this stuff up. Obamacare co-architect Jonathan Gruber, who infamously said the, quote, stupidity of the American voter helped to get the measure to become law, now blames Trump for rising premium costs. Quote, whose fault is this, Gruber asked on Fox News Sunday. Since President Trump has been elected, premiums are going up and insurers are exiting. Well, would you look at that? It's almost like Obamacare is a total failure or something. Gruber, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology economics professor, argued that perceived rising premium costs are really a one-time increase in 2016 to cover the, quote, massively underpriced policies for the first 2 years of the 2010 law. Why was it massively underpriced, you ask? Well, maybe because the CBO projection for Obamacare at the time said that they were going to have millions, tens of millions of more people enroll than actually did, and the people that did enroll wound up being quite a bit sicker than they thought they were going to be. So they had less people total enroll, and more of the people that did enroll were sicker than they thought they were going to be. What that wound up doing is obviously rising premiums. That's the only thing that can happen in that situation. Right now, major Obamacare insurers are pulling out of Iowa and Virginia exchanges, leaving many customers with one or no options and putting the state exchanges in jeopardy of collapse. And it's just hysterical because Obamacare was designed to help a certain group of people. It wasn't designed to help people on Medicare or Medicaid, and it wasn't designed to help people who were on employer insurance programs. It was designed to help people in the individual market, which is exactly what Aetna, for example, is pulling out of in Iowa and Virginia, and basically everywhere where the Obama exchanges are going on. I mean, the very people that the Obamacare was designed to help is now leaving those very people with no insurance, no insurance choices. So that's the success of Obamacare for you, and it is not Donald Trump's fault. I mean, give me a break. Gruber also argued Sunday that Trump contributed to the Obamacare's rising prices and fewer policy options for Americans because he, quote, undercuts open enrollment. And what he means by that is there was advertisements for Obamacare that Trump cut short like a week. So this guy says that a week less of Obamacare ads basically, caused the Obamacare failure. I mean, just absurdity of the highest order, but I would expect nothing less from somebody like Jonathan Gruber. I mean, a political hack of the highest order. Trump, shortly after taking office, cut advertising days before the January 2017 sign-up deadline. Gruber was never part of the Obama administration, but was a top advisor, purportedly paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for his input on how to screw the American people, and he did quite a good job. And it's just hilarious that this absolute total failure, this guy who on purpose designed a healthcare bill, Obamacare, that was designed to fail. It was designed to fail, have a bailout, and institute a single-payer system. That is what was the goal from the very beginning. That was Obama's goal. That would have been Hillary Clinton's goal. And it is just absolutely astounding to see Jonathan Gruber come out and say that it is Donald Trump's fault for rising prices in Obamacare. Just absurd. That is just absurd. 110%, even for the liberal Democrat standard. I mean, really. And now we move on to more just absurdity. More absurdity. The American Mirror. Obama talks about himself 216 times during $3 million Italy speech. I mean, look at that. He's just a man of the people right here. If the organizers of the Global Food Innovation Summit paid Barack Obama a reported $3 million to talk about himself, then they definitely got their money's worth. During his roughly 100-minute remarks in Milan, Italy, the former U.S. president talked about himself 216 times, according to an account by the American Mirror. Obama said I 168 times, me or my 40 times, and said we, us, and our, referring to his family 8 times. So, of course, Obama himself is actually just a total, complete, 100% narcissist, in case anybody needed, to be told that. And it is hilarious that you have Barack Obama, a guy who played the class warfare card his whole presidency, who tried to rile up the 99% against the evil 1%. And here you got this guy accepting $3 million for a speech, for a 100-minute speech. I mean, just a total, what a fraud, what a joke. I mean, that is just a total fraud right there. I mean, you can be an Obama fan, but, that's fine. But, you can't see stuff like this and not note the utter hypocrisy. If you don't, you have zero principles that you stand on. And I hope that is, in fact, I hope that nobody is that baseless in their in their political assertions. I mean, really, that's, you gotta actually stand by. You gotta stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. Basically, that statement is actually quite true. And now we move on to an article from InfoWars that highlights just the ultimate example of absolute, just biased fake news. And it's not from a right-wing conspiracy blog. Nope, it is from BuzzFeed, of all places. Exclusive. BuzzFeed tricked into publishing fake news story. And of course, these are the people, BuzzFeed, CNN, all these liberal, Democrat, favoring media outlets always come out and say that it's the far-right conspiracy theories that are always peddling fake news all the time. When you've got these people so desperate to have their confirmation bias affirmed that they will jump on a story that is completely fake and publish it like it's completely real. So here we go. A group of online comedians who plotted to fool BuzzFeed into posting a completely fake news story were successful after the social news and entertainment company, quote unquote, published hoax claims that the group had been denied entry to an all-female video game tournament because they were transgender. Quote, over the past 2 weeks, we set up a plot to see if we could trick BuzzFeed into posting something that is fake for the laughs. Sly Buell Riglio, I probably butchered that, told InfoWars. And it worked. BuzzFeed fell right into the trap. Quote, there was a female-only tournament hosted by a company known as ESL, Electronic Sports League, for a game called Counter-Strike Global Offensive. We decided to pose as a transgendered, quote-unquote, pro team. We made it as ridiculous as possible by uploading obvious troll pics to our profiles on the tournament's website, pics of us wearing wigs, etc. We knew we were going to get declined into joining the tournament, so once we did get turned down, I then sent an email to BuzzFeed, quote-unquote, journalists by the name of Lane Santee to try to bait them into making a story out of it, adds Riglio. After bombarding Santee with the poor me victim approach, quote unquote, BuzzFeed, quote, instantly jumped at the chance to write an article about it, says Riglio. BuzzFeed's story entitled, These Trans Women Were Asked to Show Their Passports to Enter a Female Gaming Tournament, quoted Riglio at length, describing his completely fake battle against transgender discrimination. ESL's Director of Communications, Anna Razwandowicz, man, there's some hard names for me today, even told BuzzFeed that, quote, there had been multiple incidents of male players trying to enter female tournaments as a joke, but BuzzFeed failed to realize that's exactly the stunt Riglio was pulling before publishing the fake story. So you've got this group of trolls, this group of, conservative trolls, right-wing trolls, or whatever you want to call them, literally putting a bunch of, nerdy dudes putting on a bunch of wigs and stuff, and it's a group that you can look up. They are basically a comedy group. They do stuff like this, and they have information on them in the public. They put on a bunch of wigs and pretend to be transgendered and get turned down because they're obviously trolls. And BuzzFeed falls right for it, even though the people that they talked to from the tournament that supposedly turned them down said they did so because they were trolls. I mean, a simple Google search could have found out that these people are total trolls. But are you going to see, Politico fact checks? Are you going to see, CNN freak out about this? Are you going to see, the Huffington Post say that this is just terrible fake news? Of course you're not. You're not going to see that because there's a total double standard when it comes to stuff like this. If InfoWars, has a typo, they're going to say that they're completely fake news 100% of the time, but then BuzzFeed publishes actual fake news, and you're not even going to really hear about it. And that is the state of affairs in the mainstream media establishment. It is why it is absolutely failing in many ways, and it is why smaller independent journalists and media organizations are actually on the rise right now, because people are getting sick and tired of the BS from people like BuzzFeed. So, if you enjoyed this video, and I hope you did, please subscribe, leave a comment if you've got something to say. I'd like to hear your input. If you maybe got something you'd like to hear me talk about, or you just want to say something, I'd like to hear it. So, also, if you want to hear the audio version of this, you can listen to that on SoundCloud. I'll have that uploaded. And you can follow me on Twitter, or like me on Facebook, and I will have the links for all that in the description. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and may the force be with you.